There are some areas in The Last of Us multiplayer that recently made me stop and think to myself, this looks like it would be a fun space for a kid, if it wasn't for all the people trying to kill me, which naturally made me think, well, if you take out all of the murderous humans, infected monsters, and deadly traps, what would the spaces in this game be like for a kid? So here's my ranking of The Last of Us chapters by how much fun I'd have in them as a child. The game's first chapter is called Hometown, the prologue set in Austin, Texas. As far as the story goes, of course, this has got to be one of the most depressing chapters, as we watch a teenage girl die in her father's arms. But if you remove all the death and destruction, this is basically just the beginning of a road trip with your father and uncle. I'm reminded of being in the back of the car with my siblings as my family drove into town to go to the parks or shops or movies. Or a little later in my early teens when I went on a week-long interstate road trip with my dad and sister, cramped in the back with our belongings as I awaited my next opportunity to get a Big Mac. These memories are as important to me as any other and will likely stick with me for decades. As John Barker writes, cars are indeed important contemporary everyday spaces of childhood, perhaps only surpassed in importance by home and school. Speaking of school, I'm reminded of trips that we used to take. For my school camp in grade 4, I was one of a handful of students who travelled not in a bus, but in my friend's dad's car. We spent 3 days on a small island, yet some of my fondest memories of that trip involve sitting in the back of that yellow ute eating lollies with my friends. As one study suggests, children dreamed about being on the road, and the journey seemed to be as important as the destination. So once we ignore all of the obvious horrors, I appreciate the road trip vibes of this opening chapter, thanks to some particular childhood memories, so I'd place it fairly high. If only we could have continued this nice little road trip with Joel and Tommy, as if nothing had ever happened. But sadly it did, and 20 years later, Joel awakens in the quarantine zone, the game's next chapter. There are a few different elements in this part of the game, but the thing that stands out to me the most is Joel and Tess exploring empty and abandoned buildings. Childhood experiences with this would vary based on where you grew up. For me, it was less abandoned places, I'm sure there were plenty around, but I was too scared to put that to the test, and more just empty ones, the local sawmill in the evening, a nearby construction site on the weekend, a neighborhood in the process of being made, taking on the character of abandoned places, even if they weren't actually abandoned. But abandoned buildings were and are a common exploration spot for many children for a variety of reasons. As Tim Edensaw wrote, ruins still contain this promise of the unexpected. There are limitless possibilities for encounters with the weird, with inscrutable legends inscribed on notice boards and signs, unencumbered by the assumptions which weigh heavily on highly encoded, regulated space. They're open to individual interpretation, as Robin C. Moore wrote, haunted by a residual human presence that stimulated the imagination and made it easy for children to anthropomorphize their surroundings, to create a kind of local mythology from found fragments of the past. The Last of Us is full of these kinds of locations, and the lore almost demands that players create their own kind of mythology. The truth behind that lore in this post-apocalyptic world is almost certainly more depressing than a child's imagination would concoct, but then that's part of the beauty of a child's imagination after all. And such memories of exploring these empty and abandoned locations will stick with you for a very long time. To quote John Clemens, "I have not forgotten my early play worlds, but I cannot touch them today, nor taste, smell, see, hear, or be enfolded by them as I could be as a child. And yet I can experience the same, or at least a related, frisson today when walking through quiet, once inhabited, now forgotten spaces of neglect, suggesting that not all of the brilliance of first experience of the world has been lost. There's a beauty to exploring abandoned buildings, as a child or an adult, and though it doesn't quite hit the high of some of the other chapters, this one still gets a respectable pass from me." In the next chapter, Joel, Tess, and Ellie make it to the Outskirts, where they find more abandoned buildings, the most notable being a museum. It kinda goes without saying that museums are great places for all, but especially children. In the words of Robert J. Semper, experiences in museums motivate children and adults to become more inquisitive. They encourage the development or redevelopment of curiosity. Some of my fondest childhood memories include visiting the City Science Museum and seeing the big dinosaur statue, or touching the big ball of light, also known as a plasma globe. Museums are great for bringing people together, offering space for them to understand their place in the world, and educating them on how we got where we are. The museum in the game seems to be based, at least a little, on the old State House in Boston, so possibly less interesting for children than, say, a science museum, but still interesting nonetheless. After it stopped being used as the State House, but before being turned into a museum, the old State House was used for businesses, where it was still apparently attractive to young people, according to one in 1804. The old townhouse, neatly fitted up and divided into shops and stores, where are all the varieties of manufacturers from different parts of the world, to draw attention of the young and gay. No wonder Joel and Tess brought Ellie here. And perhaps most beneficial for children, there aren't tests or grading. As Frank Oppenheimer, the founding director of the Exploratorium in San Francisco, once said, "No one ever flunked a museum." And this museum certainly won't be flunking this tier list. Another respectable score from me. Joel and Ellie eventually make their way over to Billstown in Lincoln, Massachusetts, where they explore a lot of empty houses and backyards with Bill. The one that stands out to me the most is this one, which, besides a clicker, has a cool backyard playset with a climbing wall and a slide. Hard to get much better than this. Some of my best childhood memories are of the countless hours spent in the backyard on the trampoline, homemade swings, or these old playsets with a variety of different options, including a swing that would move the entire contraption if you swung high enough. Alternatively, you could just swing around on the hill's hoist, which might not appear much safer, but are so strong they can apparently withstand cyclones. Interestingly enough, studies and observations have found that more play equipment equals more bodily exercise and less undesirable behavior in playgrounds. Children like slides and dramatic and action-oriented equipment, or at least materials that are movable, and more playground equipment means more playtime, an additional 5 minutes for every piece of fixed play equipment. And if that equipment is in their own yard, as it was for me, then that's even better. Just make sure your little brother isn't walking past when you throw one of these swings around unless you want to crack his head open. Allegedly, I have a lot of very fond memories of backyard play equipment like this, so for that alone, this chapter gets another high grade from me. After Joel and Ellie get a car from Bill, they make their way to Pittsburgh, the game's next chapter. This is a pretty big chapter, and it gets bonus points for Ellie's joke book and these turnstiles, both of which seem like endless fun for a child. Something that comes up a few times in this chapter, though, is swimming. And while I can't say I have a whole lot of experience swimming in flooded streets or hotel basements, I do still have fond childhood memories of swimming. Most of those memories involve swimming in local beaches, lakes, or pools. Some of my favorite memories were of family barbecues, before and after spending time in the pool. I always used to feel so creative and inspired when swimming in the pool for some reason. Like, I have a distinct memory of conceiving a Crash Bandicoot storyline one time. I don't know, I guess the swimming pool fired up my fanfiction genes or something. Swimming is known to be genuinely beneficial too. Studies suggest it can influence and benefit early motor development, cognitive flexibility, and visual motion in infants and toddlers. And they're known to have mental health benefits for all, enhancing stress recovery and mood regulation, and seeing overall reductions in anxiety, stress, and depressive symptoms, and improvements in self-confidence and mood. And most importantly, it's a vital safety skill to have. One study suggests that formal swimming lessons were associated with an 88% reduction in the risk of drowning in 1 to 4-year-old children. On that note, there are obviously dangers to swimming. Children must be supervised at all times, whether in a pool or a bathtub, and simple experience as a toddler is not a substitute for formal lessons as a child. But the importance of safe practice and experience cannot be overstated. As for the level itself though, as mentioned, the water is pretty disgusting and seems highly dangerous, so while swimming has its own benefits, I'm not 100% confident I'd enjoy this particular experience as much as my other childhood experiences of swimming. This gets a regular pass from me. After meeting Henry and Sam, Joel and Ellie reach the Suburbs, the next chapter. Before they get to the suburbs themselves though, they make their way through the sewers, where they stumble across one of the most important but depressing rooms in the game. Ish's hideout. Ignoring the depressing side of it, this really is the place for kids. Ellie and Sam's behavior here proves it. It's a space for kids to be kids, for them to learn and grow without having to deal with the horrific reality that is occurring outside their doors. Regardless of the situation outdoors, it's important for children to have that space and to have a variety of things to do within that space, especially with others. As one study explained, the meaning of playing with or alongside other children was that they developed a sense of belonging to a group or peer culture. An obvious venue in which children often develop that sense of belonging is at school, which is something that is all too often disrupted or outright discontinued during emergencies. Most of the world became pretty intimately familiar with this in the early 2020s, when children were forced to study from home, though thankfully most were able to adapt to it. In some emergency situations, others aren't so lucky. Educational institutions and systems can be disrupted by all manner of emergencies: epidemics and pandemics, armed conflicts and displacements, natural disasters and weather events. But it's still important to maintain that consistency for children. As the INEE standards say, in emergency situations through to recovery, quality education provides physical, psychosocial, and cognitive protection that can sustain and save lives. Maintaining any kind of normalcy amid disruption and chaos is genuinely beneficial, if only in small ways, and can help to preserve that sense of community, regain some type of stability, resilience, and hope, begin to address any feelings of trauma, and continue to provide education and guidance where it might otherwise feel unobtainable. There are so many examples of this happening throughout history too, of educational systems and facilities changing or being re-established in the face of emergencies, adaptations required during World War II, alternative options in Sarajevo during the Bosnian War, temporary learning spaces being established in countries like Bangladesh, China, Haiti, Madagascar, and Pakistan after terrible cyclones, floods, earthquakes, and tsunamis. And much more recently, hundreds of temporary learning spaces being set up in Gaza after more than 97% of its schools were damaged or destroyed. Children want to learn, they want their space. One study perhaps put it best: their commitment to seek education, be it in tents, ruins, or envisioned futures overseas, indicates that for them, learning is not merely a right, but essential for human dignity. I can't help but consider these real scenarios then when seeing a location like this in the post-apocalypse of The Last of Us. The circumstances surrounding them may be terrible, but the space itself is great, incredibly beneficial, and necessary. On a lighter note, this chapter gets even more bonus points for other scenes of Ellie and Sam just being children, not just in the hideout, but also playing darts in one of the houses later on. Extra bonus points for having this little red car too, which I always wanted growing up. Even to this day, my mum will still offer to get me one to make up for it.
Everyone I have cared for has...
One of those little red cars.
Everyone fucking except for...
Me. So obviously removed from the situation and taking into account the benefits and necessity of this space, and also considering my bonus points, this chapter gets a top tier ranking for me as a child. Sometime later, in autumn, Joel and Ellie make it to Wyoming, where they find Tommy's Dam, the game's next chapter. The dam itself seems fun to traverse, if a little dangerous, but I'm more interested in what comes after: horse riding to the ranch. I used to be scared of horses growing up after one bit my sister's thumb when she tried to feed it, but once I got over that, I've always found them beautiful to be around, and my few experiences horse riding have been incredibly memorable. It's no wonder we get so attached to them when they appear in video games. They're often just like big dogs or cats. As far as children are concerned too, there are actual benefits to being around horses, and several equine-assisted learning programs have been established to measure and achieve these benefits. It assists with resilience skills and social-emotional development. It helps children mentally, increasing their self-esteem and sense of self and improving their character skills. It allows them to develop necessary life skills like communication and problem-solving, and it promotes emotional intelligence, patience, forgiveness, understanding, and care. Whether Ellie was considering any of this after stealing one of the horses and speeding away seems unlikely, but it's not impossible that it became more relevant when she slowed down and spent time with the horses. Before that though, she spent some time exploring an abandoned bedroom at this house.
Is this really all they had to worry about? It's bizarre.
I didn't always get my own bedroom growing up, but I always got a bedroom, and I was lucky enough to always have it feel like my own space, though never this big, so I can understand Ellie's fascination and frustration at the simplicity. It's also a stunning property, so I'm very jealous too. Having one's own space, shared with others or not, is important. This hasn't always been the case, nor in every country, but at least in the United States, in the words of Siobhan Maroney, as the 20th century progressed, a private bedroom supplied the best opportunity for child privacy, solitude, and development. It's a space for them to be themselves, to have their quiet for many being a definer of privacy, and through individuality, independence, and privacy, to search for sense and meaning by their own grasp. This may not be Ellie's room, but it was someone's, and that in itself is important. And considering that, plus the horse riding experience, this chapter gets another respectable pass from me. After leaving Tommy, Joel and Ellie make their way to the university, the next chapter, which in some ways is reminiscent to exploring the high school in Billstown, but this time the entire chapter is set within an educational institution. My experience is not quite the same as a high school or university, but I did live next door to a primary school for a few years as a child. We had a gate in our backyard that led directly onto the school grounds, so don't tell the staff, but we used to visit on weekends or holidays, often playing in the playgrounds, using the tennis court or oval, and pestering the chickens. I probably have more memories of exploring the school with my siblings than from my years of actually attending it. I don't think I'm the only one. By and large, children in urban settings play in spaces that are not specifically designed for play, like building sites, pavements and pathways, in parking areas, and school compounds. I mean, schools by design are specifically established to try and appeal to children, so it makes sense that they might enjoy exploring it when it's empty, especially when there aren't any classes to attend. And as Rosie Day and Fiona Wager wrote, there is potentially a positive side to the appropriation of such spaces. They lend themselves to creative use and to being made their own private places, reclaimed from the leftovers of the adult-owned world. As long as everyone behaves safely and responsibly, I see no harm. I'm not quite sure the same could be said about the university in the game, which clearly has some safety issues, but it's a fun area to explore. It's especially interesting to explore the dorms, particularly as someone who appreciates their own space too much to see the appeal. Overall though, this seems appealing enough, about the same as a general abandoned space I suppose, so another passing grade from me. After Joel is severely injured, it's up to Ellie to look after him, which she does in the next chapter, Lakeside Resort. Before she gets to the resort itself though, she goes hunting in the snow, weather that is unique to this particular chapter. It's sadly not something with which I have personal experience, but it's clearly one of the most fun weather types for children, within a certain temperature range of course. It kinda ties into the mention of playgrounds earlier. Children like movable materials and equipment, and that summarizes snow perfectly, as it can essentially be shaped to one's whim. No wonder it's a popular place for children to play. More than this though, as seems to be common by now, playing in snow actually has some benefits to children too. No two snow days are the same. Children have to adapt to that particular snowfall, and that challenge, however small, is beneficial both physically and mentally. And as one article summarizes, walking on, touching and tasting snow are ways of showing awareness of the world, of being fully present in the moment. Sounds like an enjoyable environment for a child to me. That being said, the end of this chapter is essentially one deadly game of hide and seek, and while that game itself may have genuine benefits to a child's problem solving and social emotional skills, unfortunately this sequence is too terrifying for me to consider the same here. Clickers don't frighten me at all after hide and seek with David. Still, this chapter deserves a higher tier from me. Some months after Ellie's encounter with David, she and Joel arrive in Salt Lake City, specifically in the bus depot, where they encounter a small group of giraffes in perhaps the game's most beautiful scene. I think the scene itself still would have worked with a different animal, like with a zebra or deer as depicted in some concept art. But there's something so majestic about a giraffe, just their height and the way in which they carry themselves. There's a reason that this scene made me realize that they're my favorite animals, and when I got the chance to see and feed a giraffe some years later, that appreciation only deepened. The same is true for many children too, who often cite giraffes as one of their favorite animals to see in zoos or national parks. And generally speaking, it could be said about most animals as well, as mentioned in regards to horses earlier. In the words of Patty Bourne, relationships with animals, whether domesticated or wild, is important for the development of empathy. Animal interactions may ease tension, anxiety, stress, and feelings of depression. They can help children develop a sense of responsibility, promote a generalized sense of care towards the natural environment and its creatures, and lead to an improvement in disorders and behaviors. In fact, we even see that happen in the game, as Ellie, still struggling after her earlier encounters, seems to regain some of her motivation and playfulness after seeing the group of giraffes and petting one of them. The underground tunnel that follows is generally very creepy, with or without the infected, and threatened to bring my overall score down a little, but it's hard to beat the encounter with the giraffe, so this gets a high ranking from me. After Joel is knocked out, he awakens in the Firefly Lab, the game's last chapter, set in a hospital. I was lucky enough to mostly avoid hospitals growing up, at least for myself. Most of my visits as a child were for the births of my siblings. But I understand how traumatic and difficult they can be for those forced to spend lots of time there, especially in childhood. Even anecdotally, it's pretty clear, but studies have shown that hospitalization can be incredibly stressful for children. As Julie Lerwick wrote, children are often subject to psychological trauma, demonstrated by anxiety, aggression, anger, and similar expressions of emotion because they lack control of their environment. This sense of helplessness, coupled with fear and pain, can cause children to feel powerless in healthcare settings. separated from loved ones in an unfamiliar environment, being forced to communicate with any number of strangers, having that loss of control and self-determination, not to mention the reasons they're in the healthcare setting to begin with. It can be incredibly stressful and lead to lots of associated trauma later on. Of course, it's not always bad for everyone, especially as children develop a positive attitude and relationship with the healthcare workers. But from the onset, it doesn't seem like a very pleasant place, especially the Firefly Lab in Salt Lake City. This is easily heading straight to the bottom of the tier list for me. Not a very pleasant chapter to end on. Except, it isn't quite the end. Joel and Ellie make their way back to Wyoming, right outside Jackson, the game's short epilogue. And I mean it when I say short. It's like 2 minutes of gameplay at most. But it really reminds me of my own childhood. My siblings and I, sometimes with friends, occasionally parents, would do stuff like this all the time. Or who knows, maybe it was only like a dozen or so times, but the memories stand out so clearly. We'd explore nearby land, sometimes belonging to neighbors, sometimes not, to pick flowers, climb trees, collect firewood, play make-believe in the small forests. There's no wonder I got so many splinters and now refuse to leave the house without closed-in shoes. The brief exploration and traversal in the epilogue just feels so familiar to me, down to the opening of the barbed wire to climb through, which is a scene taken straight out of my childhood. It helps that the art and environment design is so beautiful too, and the fact that they're within eyeshot of the new home may contribute to that familiarity, since I never felt like I was too far from home when exploring myself. I mean, I couldn't be, lest I missed my mum telling us that dinner was ready. I've always loved the brief epilogue of this game, and I especially love it from the perspective of my childhood. It helps to be aware of the health and development benefits of spending time in nature as a child too. Maybe it's because it's not long enough for anything to go wrong to bring down my score, but if only for my childhood nostalgia, this is easily another S-tier chapter for me. Overall, a pretty even and respectable spread of chapters, largely influenced by theory behind childhood experiences and my own personal nostalgia, I suppose. I wonder if this is the exact kind of tier list that Naughty Dog developers had in mind when working on the game's levels. I can acknowledge how unusual it might be to look at the game's chapters from this perspective, but as cheesy as it may be, it's like the Fireflies say, when you're lost in the darkness, look for the light. Maybe next time I'll rank war movies by how many sick kickflips I could do there or something, I don't know.